to MHK News. I'm Miss Renee. In the last couple of weeks, we've been learning the story of Moses as part of God's unfolding story from the Bible. Remember, the Bible is true, and from beginning to end, it tells us of God's great love for us. In the beginning, God created everything, and it was beautiful. The people loved God, and they walked with him. But the people disobeyed God, and that separated them from him. That made God's heart sad, but he didn't stop loving them. Instead, God chose a special people. And for that special people, he had a special plan. God's plan was to send Jesus. God sent Jesus to help us. Jesus died on the cross for our sins, and 3 days later, he rose from the grave. After Jesus' resurrection, he left instructions for starting the church. Now, Jesus is in heaven preparing a place for us. Moses is one of the special people that God chose, and his story tells us of how great and powerful God is. Remember, we learned from his sister Miriam how Moses was born and how God protected him even as a baby. Last week, we learned about Moses' interaction with God himself, with the burning bush and the staff that turned to a snake. While investigating more of Moses' story, WMHK News has uncovered some pretty amazing things that happened when Moses went to Egypt to tell Pharaoh that God wanted him to let his people go. Remember that Pharaoh was not treating the Israelites, God's chosen people, fairly at all. They were forced to work long hours doing hard jobs, and they were also treated very meanly. The details we uncovered were astonishing. WMHK News has discovered that when Moses went to talk with Pharaoh, at first Moses knew this was going to happen. Pharaoh was not willing to listen. As we reported last week, this was one of the things that Moses was most concerned about. However, as we have seen throughout this story, God always has a plan and a way to show his power. Shortly after Moses spoke with Pharaoh, we've learned that some unbelievable things started to happen. First, the water in the Nile River changed to blood. Moses went back to Pharaoh and explained that God would stop this plague if Pharaoh let the Israelites go. But Pharaoh still said no. Then the land was covered with frogs. Moses went back to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh still said, no way. Lice and gnats covered the land. Pharaoh still said no. The livestock, the cows, the horses, they all started to get sick, but Pharaoh still said no. The people in Egypt got sores called boils on their skin. Moses tried again to speak to Pharaoh, who still said no. Hail covered the land. Locust covered the land. There was darkness everywhere. With each horrible thing that happened, Pharaoh still refused to let the Israelites go. WMHK News wanted to learn what finally changed Pharaoh's mind. The final plague that hit the Egyptians was definitely the worst, and it caused Pharaoh to lose his only son. But through all of these plagues, the Israelites were not affected. God protected them. God promised to protect the Israelites, especially from this last plague, if they covered their door frame with the blood of a sacrificed lamb. If they were obedient and followed God's order, the impact of the 10th plague would pass over them, and they would not be hurt. Pharaoh and the Egyptians did not put the blood of a sacrificed lamb on their door, so they had to deal with the consequences of their decisions. Pharaoh's family was touched personally when his son died. Finally, he decided he didn't want any more of these plagues, so he let God's people go and told Moses he could lead the Israelites out of Egypt. WMHK News promises to find out the rest of the story as we dig in deeper next week to find out what happens when the Israelites are finally able to leave Egypt. We're hopeful to have an eyewitness report from Moses himself within the next couple of weeks to let us know exactly what happens in this amazing story. But what do we know so far from this story? The verse from Psalm 135:5 is right. For I know that the Lord is great. The Lord is a great and powerful God. We're looking forward to digging deeper with all of you and finding out more. We'll see you next week on WMHK News.